of the fall 2023. Thank you, everybody. It's a really busy time of year, so we appreciate that everybody is making the time to be with us here today to talk about something really important and sort of getting forgotten. So we appreciate everybody being here. I'm Yasmin Selik. I am a international politics professor here at FIT, and which is why I'm here. And it's my honor to introduce Souzeina Mushtaq, Professor Souzeina Mushtaq, who's an assistant professor in the Department of Communication and Media Studies at the University of Wisconsin, River Falls. And I now turn the floor over to her and leave it in her able hands.
Thank you so much, Professor Sylvie Levine, and the organizers of the World Affairs Lecture Series here at State University of New York, Fashion Institute of Technology. I'm really happy to be back moderating this event. Earlier this year, on a chilly Monday morning of February 6 at around 4:17 a.m. Turkish time, a powerful earthquake of 7.8 magnitude struck central and southern Turkey and northwest Syria. The deadly earthquake was followed by a second earthquake of 7.7 magnitude in the middle of the day at 1:24 p.m. As most news outlets reported, these earthquakes were the deadliest in Turkey's modern history, killing over 55,000 people in Turkey and around 6,000 people in neighboring Syria, and injuring a further 100,000 people. Turkey has a history of catastrophic earthquakes, and geologists have been voicing concerns for years about the seismic threats and advocating measures to mitigate these disasters. However, the aftermath of such calamities exposes a distressing reality. Society remains inadequately equipped to handle these crises. In fact, as the New York Times reported, that on February 3 this year, famous Turkish geologist Dr. Naci Görür warned on his social media account about pressure on faults in southern Turkey near the border with Syria. He even meticulously pinpointed susceptible areas on a map with yellow pins that could suffer damage in a quake, and was once again frustrated by the lack of action. Then 3 days later, on February 6, two powerful earthquakes struck the area, heavily damaging some of the towns he had marked. So some of the pressing questions one may ask are, despite persistent warnings, why do authorities fail to take concrete preventable actions? Can the colossal damage caused by these natural disasters be considered wholly natural? Or is it unnatural, as the title of this presentation notes? So to answer some of these questions and more, I would like to welcome our guest, filmmaker and architect Onur Can Tepe, who's currently based in Rotterdam, Netherlands. Onur's work revolves around the concept of crafting spaces in harmony with the natural and constructed environments. Onur will share his insights for about 30 minutes, and then we'll engage in an open discussion and eventually leave the floor open for questions from the audiences. Please feel free to use the Q&A or chat section to post your questions. Welcome, Onur. The floor is all yours.
Hi, thanks, Souzeina. Thanks for the introduction. I should probably share my screen at this point. Yes. Is it? Are you able to see it?
Yes.
Okay. Now, welcome everyone, and thanks for the invitation to make a talk about this this topic that is now I would like to say timely topic, but it's already It's been a few months, but perhaps the thing is that it should be timely at any time, because earthquakes are a reality in Turkey. They are natural disasters. Well, they are natural events that turn into disasters because of unnatural reasons, you could say. I'm a filmmaker and architect. I am involved. I've worked as an architect. I know how buildings, let's say, come together, how they get built, and what are the processes look like. But in my work as a filmmaker, I look at the meaning of spaces and try to discover the stories behind them. So from that perspective, I prepared a presentation on why this disaster has happened, and what's the history behind it, but also what are the human stories behind it. I want to start with a few images to refresh everyone's memories, also a few facts. But first, some images from this disaster. And I want to read a quotation from a book which is about another earthquake, but are also relevant to all earthquakes. Buildings killed off their foundations, slumped in on themselves, split in half or sunk. 4-foot-high ground waves rolled through the roads as though the pavement were liquid. Before the quake, people never pictured these things happening. Like all of us, they looked around and registered what they saw as stable and permanent, a world that just was. But there are moments when the world we take for granted instantaneously change, when reality is abruptly upended and the unimaginable overwhelms real life. We don't walk around thinking about that instability, but we know it's always there, at random and without warning. A kind of terrible magic can switch on and scramble our lives. This is a quotation from a book which narrates the earthquake in Alaska in 60s. But you could also say that it's relevant to all earthquakes everywhere. In this image, this for me is a perfect example of that instantly of a disaster. You see a fridge full of food prepared by people and probably never will be eaten by them because it's now the subject of a very, very dramatic picture. So what happened in the earthquake? This was in February, 7.8 earthquake followed by a second quake of 7.7 within a day. 40,000 buildings have collapsed. Confirmed death toll is around 60,000 people. UN estimates 1.5 million people were left homeless, and an estimated 14 million people were affected. It had taken place in southeast of Turkey, and the magnitude of the area is it covers almost entire Syria. It also almost, you could say, half of Turkey is covered by it. I made a comparison to what would it mean, what is the scale of that, let's say, when you compare it to US. It covers an area that covers on to the north Montreal, to the south Washington. It's a massive area with massive consequences, also massive challenges in the aftermath, logistical challenges, organizational challenges, and it's killed a lot of people, and it's been very, very tragic. Now, there has been so many months after that, and there are some works being done. But before I get to that, I want to talk about two questions, just to just inform everyone about the basics of earthquake. So these are the earthquakes that has happened in 2017. You can see that some of the world is totally free of earthquakes, whereas some other ones are prone to earthquakes. Why do they happen only at certain places in the world? It's because of the structure of the earth. So we live on massive lava and liquidity, and actually what we inhabit is the crust of the earth, which is a tiny layer if you compare to the rest of it, and it's made of tectonic plates. So these tectonic plates, they come together at certain places, and when they, so it's like always the metaphor that is used is a jigsaw puzzle. Earthquakes happen when at places where they touch each other, because there is friction. They sometimes want to go on top of each other, sometimes they go next to each other, and that creates certain stress. When that stress is released every 50 years, 100 years, 300 years, 500 years, then there is the earthquake. Now the earthquake in Turkey and Syria that had happened at the fault line that is between Anatolian plate and Arabian plate. So Turkey is especially suffers from frequent earthquakes because it's it's where Eurasian plate, Anatolian plate, and Arabian plate together comes together, and this was the reason. This is the reason why there are a lot of earthquakes happening in this part of the world. Just to let everyone know that there is no way to predict an earthquake. No one has ever predicted. We do not know how, and we do not expect to know how anytime in the foreseeable future. What we do know, however, that they will happen at some point in the future. It can be 1 year, it can be 1 day, it can be 500 years. The city became desolate, for nothing remained apart from some buildings beside the mountain. No holy chapel, nor monastery, nor any other holy place remained, which had not been torn apart. Everything had been utterly destroyed. This is from 563 year, so 1500 years ago. It has been written by the Roman historicist John Malalas about the same city, about the same area, and they're talking about a similar disaster. So the other question is, why do some buildings collapse while others don't? Let's look at what happened actually. What is the building stock and how many of it has been affected by this earthquake? Just to give us an idea of the effect on the built environment. So roughly 40,000 buildings have collapsed right away. Almost 300,000 buildings have been damaged. Some are light damages, some are very heavy damages to the level that they had to be demolished afterwards. And together they form 56% of the whole building stock in the region. Now that also means that almost half of it has been undamaged. And the reason is, as you can imagine, buildings they have structures, they have load-bearing structures. And if the structure is strong enough, robust enough, if they're able to withstand the forces of an earthquake, then they will survive. If not, they won't. Buildings normally deal with vertical forces, so they have loads of themselves. They have to stand on their feet. But when an earthquake hits, it shakes the ground horizontally. That means lateral forces. That means a different sort of rigidity is needed. And if the structure hasn't been done according to the standards, if it hasn't been done according to by predicting these forces, then it will collapse. In real world, we have in a way a triangle of processes, let's say, to make sure that the buildings are done right. So you design them, you plan them, you look at how the structure has to be made, what sort of materials has to be used, at which locations, and it has to be done at that level right to be able to withstand an earthquake. It has to be done, then executed properly, because design is on paper, execution is on real life, and to make sure that this whole system works and nobody does anything consciously or unconsciously wrong, then there are control mechanisms. So these control mechanisms are public. They are municipalities or the third parties that are assigned by municipalities, and whereas design and engineering and execution is done by private parties. And if all three corners of this triangle work correctly, then you have buildings like the half of the buildings and that withstand the disaster. Now, after a disaster, a lot of what everyone immediately thinks of, why didn't we control them before? As if the public or as if the private individuals and developers it's okay for them to make mistakes, or it's okay for them to do cost cuttings at the expense of people's lives. And that also happens. People or society immediately introduces new rules to make sure that the new buildings are done well. We don't repeat this disaster again. They are done to standards. There are a number of instruments to do that. You can you can introduce new legislations. You can also introduce new organizations. This had happened before. In my lifetime, in 1999, I was a kid. I had experienced I wasn't there, but I was in the region of Izmit earthquake. This was very close to Istanbul, which made the disaster even more feel close to everyone in Istanbul, and that resulted in 20,000 deaths. Now, it's especially important to know this earthquake because that's again the same images, again the same media attention, and everyone just talked about it for days and months and years. And later new legislations have been passed 2 years after that, ensuring that this has happened, but it's not going to happen again. It should not happen again. Now, what is striking with this disaster in 2023 is that more than half of the buildings are actually built after 2001. So that's really terrible news, because we all assumed that after that disaster we learned, and we're not going to repeat those mistakes again. We were not going to do corruption in the structure of the buildings. We were not going to build things that are unsafe for people, but more than half of those buildings are newly built. It's also good to put things into perspective. So 1999 Izmit earthquake, 2001 new legislations, and 2018 there is the zoning amnesty, which has been introduced by the current government. More on that will come later. But there is a critical question. How can it be that in a country where there are the skills and the technology and money to build safe buildings, it still fails to avoid such disasters? So the skills, well, you need people who has the knowledge on how to do things, and you have that in Turkey. You need technology, materials. You have that in Turkey, and you have money. But money is a funny one, because some experts have claimed after the earthquake, yeah, but it's a poor area. Now that doesn't actually mean anything. Money is, at the end of the day, it's an abstract thing. It's about how we do trade with each other. So if you have these, if you have the skills and technology, you should be able to somehow build things in the right way. But I want to look into money a little bit closer, because we know that if the building had collapsed, well, that means that the structure hasn't been done properly, and there has been some cost cutting done there. There can of course there can. I'm sure there are also some examples where there was a mistake, but a lot of it are not mistakes. So what happens there? What is the money that where does the money flow that makes a building unsafe? So this is, if you buy a land, this is, let's say, the business model of any building, any apartment. If you buy an apartment, you pay for the cost of land, you pay for the construction costs, and then the developer will add roughly something like 20% profit on it, 20, 25, 30 if you're lucky. And this is the business model. So a developer will buy the land, or get an arrangement with the owner of the land, and then they will pay for the construction costs. And at the end of the day, after 2-3 years, they will sell it with a profit of 20% margin. Most of the buildings in that region are steel, concrete. That means there are two ingredients that make them: concrete itself and the reinforcement steel. That amounts to roughly 26% of the construction costs. And what they have done is that they've taken some part of it. They've used less colored concrete, less reinforcement material, and then they wanted to add that to their profit. Now, if you take 1/3 of it, which will be already forcing the limits a lot, because you can't take too much out of it actually, because then the building won't stand on its own. Now that amounts to extra profit of 6%. But even to do that, you have to put some of it back to your construction cost, because you have to bribe people, you have to pay people so that they turn a blind eye on that. So at the end of the day, 3%. And it's just, this is what caused the disaster. And there's no explanation to the economics of it, because no one had consciously made the decision, that no one thought that 3% was going to mean will trade that for the death of people, or for them to face prison. It's in a way the state of denial that it's not going to happen, and a lot of those developers are semi-professional, and they do these constructions with borrowed money. Sometimes they themselves live in those buildings, so there's really not a logic or planning behind it. It's just they're just trying to save the day. They're just trying to cut the costs wherever they can, and then they're trying to get to the end of the day, and the result is the disaster. This is from a quotation from one of the mayors in that area. I regularly get requests by citizens to turn a blind eye on their illegal construction projects. Even though we deny these requests, oftentimes they go ahead with these constructions anyways, hoping for a zoning amnesty at some point in the future. Now, when you're understaffed, as most of the public institutions are, you cannot go after everyone. So, what's a zoning amnesty? Zoning amnesty is a short-term, it's a political move by governments with a short-term political agenda that they introduce to, where they always name it as solving citizens' problems. There has been a lot of buildings that are built without a permit, or without, they have been perhaps altered later on, and they are illegal for one thing or another. So what the government does is that they do, let's say, an introduction of a law saying, okay, all these buildings that are under these categories, we give amnesty, and they can go ahead with their lives without us demolishing those buildings. And if they're unsafe, they should come to us, but that doesn't, in practice, that doesn't always happen. These are images of how that zoning amnesty was introduced in 2018. So the man with the jacket, he is giving the good news to the citizens, young and old. Everyone is happy. They are urged to check their cell phones to see whether they have the rights for this, and everyone is happy, and everyone is given amnesty. But when you juxtapose that with this image, which is what that leads to, it's very, very tragic, because in a way the municipality or politicians always do that before the 2018 was right before the general elections. That meant for them to win the elections again, or to gain an advantage in the elections. And in the future, what's going to happen? That I will solve tomorrow. That's the sort of approach, and that leads to collective trauma. And that collective trauma is an important one, because it's now what's now being experienced in that region is a trauma, and it's very tragic, and it's has been very much exploited in the media. But after a while, that's the story isn't that hot anymore, and then whatever happens there, not everyone knows about it. So this is one of the survivors of the earthquake. He chronicles his experience during the earthquake, after the earthquake, and he says he knew that his brother-in-law was dead, but he had to find or locate the body. That meant that he had to go to a massive area where there were hundreds of dead bodies, and someone had to unzip all the bags, show him the face. Is this your brother-in-law? Yes, no, go ahead, and the next one. So he had to see hundreds of dead faces before he could finally find the face of his brother-in-law. It's his trauma, but it's also everyone else's trauma. He sees hundreds of people, his friends, his neighbors, it really goes, it's more than just losing a relative. The day after the earthquake, I went to the city center to see the state of my shop. I knew it was collapsed, but I could not imagine that when I go there, I was not even going to be able to locate where it was. It was completely vanished. He talks about, he is a survivor of the 1999 earthquake. And he talks about this complete loss of orientation, the complete loss of his memories, where he was, where he is in the world. So it's, in a way, it's literally and figuratively, it's about losing your space in the world, and it's about losing, in a way, part of your identity in the world. I always believe that images are powerful. After being at the disaster site, I am more traumatized by the smell. I cannot forget that smell. And a common reaction is to say, I'm going to build my own house because I no longer trust anyone. So I'm going to buy a land, build my own house, and I'll be safe. Okay, but how about the restaurant that you go? How about the office space that you go? How about the school of your child? And this is also important because these are the spaces where we come together and where we form, where we meet other people, and where we form a society. And always see the reaction of, I don't trust the society anymore, and I'm gonna close myself to my own space. I'm gonna only depend on myself. Well, you can say that, but it's never really the solution, because we all spend significant amount of our time outside of our homes, and what they are actually saying is that I lost my belief in the system. I lost my belief in anyone selling me any house, anyone that is controlling those, whether they're made to standards by representing me. I just rely on myself. So these are the really the results of this trauma, and how we deal with trauma is important, because you will never be able to have the control mechanisms at the level that you will, from now on, you will control everything. That didn't happen before, that's not going to happen again. But how we deal with trauma, that can potentially lead to some behavior change, that can potentially lead to a change in the minds of people that are gonna, in 5 years from now, 10 years from now, not tomorrow, not today, because today everyone behaves themselves, but in 5 years, 10 years from now, who will say, I cannot do cost cutting here because this can be deadly. How do you do that? How do you ensure that? And that is important, that the trauma is dealt with and is acknowledged. So the aftermath is, now there are 13 locations around in the region where all the debris is gone. Now debris is and some people are living next to those still in temporary structures, and some of that debris is dumped into wetland areas, which are now affecting the nature and the life cycles of animals in those areas, of birds, of other native animals, and just thinking out loud, is it now the right way to really get rid of that in the same rush to kind of clear up and to make as if it didn't happen. I'll put it somewhere else, I'll dump it somewhere else as quick as I can. Should we actually see that debris somewhere? Could it be part of the landscape? I think these are the questions that has to be raised in order to potentially lead to some cultural changes. This is Erdogan immediately after the earthquake promising that we will build that many houses, we will build that many new safe places for people to live, and we will arrange credits for people to be able to afford that. And then these are the buildings that are built. And where are they built, and why are they built in that place? These are questions that are also kind of washed away in that rush to make as if nothing has happened and we are strong and we will go ahead. This is a building, was one of those buildings. If you look at it, you can clearly see that this represents trauma, because you can clearly see that it's over-engineered. There is just too much concrete going on there, and the image tells already that yeah, this happened, but we're now going to be safe. We're just going to put more concrete. We're just going to pour more steel in there. But is it really the right way to deal with that? And is it that image of safety? It's also about an image that this construction conveys. And I want to again quote the same writer: "What is safety anyway? Nothing is fixed, that even the ground we stand on is in motion. Underneath us, there's only instability. Beyond us, there's only chance." I live in Rotterdam, and here we also have had our own trauma, and this had led to some artifacts outside in the streets and in the city that one can see. It led to sculptures. It led to the city was bombarded heavily during the World War II, and now you can see these artifacts at all the locations where a bomb had fell, and people see that every day. People are then reminded of that disaster every day. It's part of life. It's part of processing the loss, and it's also part of reminding us ourselves that this can happen again. This is perhaps some might know that it's a doomsday clock. It's a symbol that represents the likelihood of a human-made global catastrophe, and it's represented by now, in the opinion of the members of the Society of Scientists. And every year they reveal what the time is now, and the midnight is the global catastrophe, and it is now 90 seconds to midnight. Yeah, is it accurate? No. Can it ever be accurate? Also no. But does it matter? Also no. It creates an urgency. It's going on since 1947, I believe, and it's a language to remind people that global catastrophes can happen, and it's a medium to communicate it. And I think these are equally important as new legislations, new rules, new, more concrete, whatever. This is a museum in Berlin, which was also very much bombarded during the Second World War. And this was a reconstruction of a museum, Neues Museum, and after very long deliberations of how to reconstruct that, and a lot of ideas actually, or a lot of force pulling in the direction of, no, we have to build everything as if this disaster didn't happen. Now, finally, what is built is also a structure that everything that is lost has been built with modern tools, with modern techniques, and with a modern visual language. And that also acknowledges the loss. So I think my final words are, buildings are where we live, where we feel safe, and where we come together with others, but they also have places in our memories. And we locate ourselves in the world by orienting ourselves according to those buildings. And in natural or unnatural disasters, they become weaponized, they become destructive. So more safety, more concrete, in a way, these are immediate reactions of trauma. But I think it's important to acknowledge the loss and acknowledge the trauma and to stay with that trauma and to live with it and to find the right language, right new mediums, new artworks, new experiences to remind people the loss. Because maybe one last thing, because probably it's the people who has experienced this earthquake, they won't experience another earthquake, not even their children, but it's going to be the generations after. And how do you create the artifacts that and the stories that will reach them, and so that this disaster doesn't repeat itself. This is my presentation. Thank you, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you, Onur, for your insightful presentation and for sharing your research with all of us. If you don't mind, you can stop sharing the screen. So yeah, I think you have to like down, you see those options, share, you might have to like click there to stop sharing the screen.
Yeah, 1 sec.
While you figure out how to stop stop your screen from sharing, I just wanted to point out some of the things that you mentioned in your presentation, which were absolutely incredible. You talked about the collective trauma of people, of communities that happens after such disasters, and you also talked about incorporating that empathy in design as we are building new structures, because most of the buildings that you mentioned that are prone to collapsing are basically the new buildings, right? And there is a lot of bribery and there's a lot of corruption in construction, and it has repercussions in the real life. I mean, I was reading about when the disaster happened in Turkey. I was reading about the Renaissance residence in Turkey, which was like one of the iconic projects, right? High-rise buildings, and then it was basically became one of the deadliest sites for, you know, in the wake of the earthquake, right? And the reason for the collapse in that particular building was that it had a flawed design, right? There was minimal oversight. And I'm seeing like a lot of people have those questions, and I have that some of those questions as well. And I'm going to ask you, it's like there's so much you emphasize in your presentation that people should remember, because we have noticed that there is this collective amnesia, right? We as people tend to forget. And then these disasters happen again, and then it's like, oh God, what are we going to do now, right? So what I'm interested in understanding more from you is, how do you think this understanding of collective trauma that results from these disasters like earthquakes, and then you have corruption in the construction projects, how do you think that understanding of that collective trauma would inform future policies and even community support systems in Turkey?
How do you think that would lead to that? Like, you mean?
Yeah, like building safer buildings, you know, making sure that this does not happen. But you sort of, you know,
Yeah,
pointed that out in your presentation. But when you're talking about these disasters not only like impacting buildings, not only buildings are not the only things that are collapsing or coming down, it has impact on real life people. You talked about one person who was trying to find his brother-in-law, and he had to go and look at hundreds of dead bodies before he could figure out who the brother-in-law is, right? You talked about someone being traumatized by the smell of the debris, right? Of these dead bodies stuck inside the rubble. So when these disasters happen, it has consequences. Real life, it is impacting real people. So what I'm interested in understanding is, how do you think this understanding of this collective trauma of real people resulting from these disasters like earthquakes, and then understanding that there is corruption, there's bribery in construction projects, how do you think that would inform future policies and also community support systems in Turkey?
Well, I mean, one thing is obviously policies, and but if you look at the paper, on paper, all the policies are there. And if you look at what has to be done, the standards, yeah, everything is done the right way. All the processes, as they're expected to be followed, are in place. But then the practice is different. So in a way, policy change is one thing, but cultural change is another thing. You can make any policy that you want, and you can also imprison as many of those contractors as you want. I'm not saying that that's not going to have an impact, but in a way that we see that at the end of the day, you come to the human elements and you come to the disruptions in the system, because people always do find a place, and it's how quickly people make that jump in their minds to here I want to do a trick, here I want to do cut the cost by doing this, and I'm going to pay this guy, I'm going to propose this. Sometimes it's not even, it's sometimes it's suggested by the person working for municipality. Sometimes it's the other way around. But how do you create a collective consciousness about let's not go there? How do you create an environment where people don't even think about that? Now that's important, and that's when a trauma, if it's processed right, can lead to a change. But we also, and that was also one of the things that I wanted to emphasize, that we know that this only policy change is not going to make anything. It didn't make anything, and that really was the shock of this disaster. Everyone knew that if it's built before 1980s, if it's built before 2000s, yeah, you can't really trust them. You can't really rely on them. And that's kind of that was a fate that everyone accepted, but not this, because not if we didn't learn from this, well, that means it's going to happen again and again and again.
No, absolutely. That makes sense. And you sort of talked about that it's not only about the policy changes, because everything is written there and people just have to follow it. You mentioned the cultural change. Do you mind elaborating on that? What would a cultural change look like in terms of making sure that these disasters don't happen?
Oh, cultural change, I think it comes back to the same point, like is the behavior, it's a behavioral change that you want to happen. It's people giving a call to the mayor and finding it okay to talk about a permission that easily, and that this is so normal that you can even call the mayor if you have a connection. Yeah, that that's the culture, and that's the culture of doing business. That's the culture of building buildings or solving your problems with the public bodies. And I think and these are deep-rooted behavioral patterns, but that doesn't mean that they cannot change. Now, do I believe that it's going to change? Yeah, maybe,
Right.
but it's not. It's going to require, I think, yeah, and to begin with, is going to require people really coming to terms, not shying away from what has happened. Because if we just do like nothing happened, nothing happened, nothing happened, I'm going to do more buildings, I'm going to do more concrete, I'm going to do everything safe, let's move on, let's build new buildings. Yeah, then you don't really give space.
Right.
It's also a how do you say? It's also in a way fearful. You know, it's like you cannot stand the loss,
Right.
and you just try to go ahead. Yeah, but then you then you don't really go very far.
Right, absolutely. Sort of jumping off from where you left, there's a question from the audience, which is, how do you feel about the materials used in these buildings? Concrete is commonly used in Turkey, but for example, in the US, the materials can be softer, such as wood or construction steel, which may be safer. Where do you stand in terms of material use or choices?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. It's also discussions that we had with some of our colleagues. Wooden constructions, they are in case of a disaster, they tend to be less deadly. But the problem is the entire nation knows how to build with concrete. And when you're in a rush to build things, you're not going to have time to and especially wooden buildings of a certain height, certain density is newly explored in the world. The wooden buildings in US are mostly low story buildings. And when it becomes high story, then it becomes concrete or steel. And concrete and steel, also the let's say the abundance of the material, the abundance of concrete production is much more common in the country. So everyone knows how to build with that. There has to be, obviously, I think, experimentation for those new techniques as well. But it's in the short term, it's unrealistic that a semi-professional developer is gonna venture into that, because a lot of those buildings are done by semi-professional developers, people who has some money, and they jump into that adventure, and then they will do it with concrete. I mean, it's should certainly be. I think people should certainly try those building techniques, but when it comes to higher stories, it's there is very little knowledge in the country, and also very little material as well for that kind of high technology wood, CLT, etc. That is also it will be expensive, and it will be very difficult to find that material.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I know we are running short of time. I'll just take one question from the audience. It says, it has been 9 months now since the earthquake. Has there been a building code reform or sentences handed out to developers or even tougher controls?
Not as far as I know, but also it's also not needed really. The building codes are there. If everyone follows them, then it's there. It's okay. It's fine. It's just the people don't follow them, and the system doesn't produce the environment where people have to follow them.
Yeah. So do you think, like, now that, we have almost 55,000 deaths and so many injuries and a lot of people left homeless, do you think that there will be like tougher measures that to make sure that these building codes are actually taken care of, they're actually included?
In the short term, yes.
Okay.
2 years, 3 years, yes. But then that energy will exhaust itself, and then it will be business as usual. And
Right.
that's kind of the the topic of this presentation, really.
Right. Yeah, there's that, again, that collective amnesia basically at the end of the day wins, because
We've seen that happening. We've seen that happening. The exact same story has happened.
yeah. Thank you, Onur. There are some questions about the corruption, but I think you already mentioned that in your presentation. But thank you so much for taking the time, for sharing your insights with all of us. I would ask Professor Silic to take from here. So thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. This was really eye-opening. The images are so profoundly moving, and the explanations and analysis, I think, will give all of us something to think about. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. I'd especially like to just mention that, you know, these events are a collaborative process. And I'd like to especially thank the Dean of the School of Liberal Arts and Sciences, Dean Patrick Knisley, for his support, as well as Mary Sujimoto from the Dean's Office, the Social Sciences Department, the Chairperson, Professor Paul Clement, and of course, Souzeina, Emre, and Praveen, who is quiet, but is really running the show from behind the scenes. Thank you so much, everybody, and please join us next semester for another World Affairs lecture.
Thank you.
Emery, you may stop the recording.